Good day. My name is Helen Card, Business Development Manager of the Bermuda Business Development Agency. Welcome to this Bermuda Angle webinar entitled Bermuda's ESG Experience and Influence on the Global Reinsurance Industry. Since late last year, the BDA and its partners have traveled the world, from COP26 in Glasgow to Silicon Valley to New York, London, and several major cities in between, to tell Bermuda's unique ESG story, particularly in relation to climate risk finance. But as we progressed on our ESG journey, we realized how significant it was to gather data about ESG practices, developments, and aspirations in our market. This has resulted in the publication ESG in Bermuda, The Rising Tide, which was launched at the inaugural Bermuda Climate Summit on May 24th. The report was coordinated jointly by the BDA and Oxbow Partners in the belief that greater transparency over ESG activity in Bermuda market will allow the ecosystem to greater refine and accelerate their strategies. It is in that same spirit of collaboration and commitment to transparency that we are holding today's webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Bermuda's Deputy Premier, the Honorable Walter Roban, JPMP, who will give an outline on Bermuda's climate strategies. Deputy Premier Roban has been a member of Parliament since December 2007. He was first appointed to Cabinet in 2009, made Deputy Premier in July 2017, and became Minister of Home Affairs in November of 2018. He has also worked in the legal profession and also in Bermuda's banking industry. Deputy Premier Roban, I now hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be a part of this webinar today with Oxbow Partners and all the other participants. I'm here to talk to you a bit about Bermuda and the Bermuda story as it relates to ESG and issues around climate and Bermuda's ambitions to become a center for climate risk finance for the world. Just a little bit about the Bermuda story. We are an archipelago of islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We're about 600 miles away from any major point of land, so we're one of the most isolated islands in the world. And because of this, we have always had sustainability on our agenda as an island community. For over 400 years, we have recognized that it was important that we protect our environment, that it was the ocean and the environment around us that would help us to sustain ourselves in this community. So in this modern era, Bermuda is committed to climate change. We're committed to preserving our oceans. We're committed to managing our land sustainably. And we're committed to continuing to foster a healthy community. We're committed to reducing the uses of fossil fuels, reducing our carbon footprint, and participating in climate action to preserve climate change. We have made ambitious plans for ourselves. Bermuda's energy sector, which is independently regulated by the regulatory authority, has an integrated resource plan, which is committed to Bermuda by 2035, reducing our fossil fuel generation to less than 80% reliance. So we intend to have 85% or more of our energy generation by 2035 provided by renewable sources. We also committed to reducing our carbon footprint and ensuring that by 2035, we are producing 25% less carbon into the environment. Late last year, we were able, with the support and partnership with a company called Saturn Power, in our efforts to increase the amount of renewable energy that's produced in Bermuda, to ensure that a 6 megawatt solar utility scale farm started operation. So Bermuda is now benefiting in a major way from renewable energy with this 6 megawatt utility scale solar array, which has positioned us amongst other islands in the Caribbean to having some of the most progressive and fast-moving energy policy. In fact, just earlier this year, Bermuda was awarded Best Utility Scale Project in all the Caribbean at the Caribbean Renewable Energy Forum in Miami in April. And Bermuda continues to work to attempt to ensure that our environment is protected and that we diversify our energy mix. A part of the government zone strategy is to ensure that more government buildings have and are benefiting from renewable energy. A number of major government buildings have been installed over the past few years with solar panels, and that will continue throughout the government estate. We are investing even more so in more renewable energy opportunities for the community by improving wastewater treatment and ensuring that that will be powered by renewable energy in the future as well. We've ensured that every citizen has the opportunity to affordably invest in renewable energy. All components of renewable energy technology, solar panels, are duty-free for anyone who wishes to purchase a system. And all the components thereover are also duty-free. We've invested heavily in clean transport. Half of our bus fleet is scheduled to be totally electric over the next year or so. And we will ensure that in the not too distant future, all of our public transportation and much of the government fleet will be electric. And we are committed to island-wide electric transport by 2035. One of the other innovations we have brought to the table, because we are an island that is relied on innovating to survive, is that we have brought legislation into the Parliament, which will create an innovator's license, essentially a regulatory sandbox where those in the international community who have innovative energy technologies and they wish to have the opportunity to test, we invite them to come to Bermuda and use Bermuda as a test bed for innovative renewable energy technology. A company by the name of Sea-Based is already interested and lined up to take advantage of the energy regulatory sandbox once established to deploy their own technology, which is wave energy. And we are very excited about this. We know that our oceans around us have an opportunity for us to further expand and diversify our energy mix. And we invite innovation. We invite the opportunity for locals as well as international people to invest in energy opportunities in Bermuda. But not only is the energy transition important to us, marine and land preservation is also crucial to our future. And Bermuda has for centuries focused on ensuring that our marine environment is protected, and we continue to ensure that not only are certain endemic and rare species protected within our waters, whether it be whales, whether it be turtles, whether it be sharks, whether it be manta rays, but we also have programs to ensure the protection of our seagrass, our mangroves, our coral reefs. We have the only coral reef system in the North Atlantic, and it's the most northerly coral reef system in the world. So we know that it's precious, we know that it's unique, and we have in place a robust enforcement and regulatory framework to protect our marine environment. We are extremely serious about continuing to sustainably use and also ensure the highest protection for our marine environment, which is why in 2018, we created a partnership with the Waite Foundation. And with them, we have created, along with our partner, the institute called BIOS, the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, we have created the Bermudan Ocean Prosperity Program, which is helping us to develop our marine spatial plan and a blue economy strategy for Bermuda so that we can sustainably use our marine resources, but at the same time protect them for the long term. We understand that partnerships are crucial to the work that we need to do around climate action and also protecting our marine environment. So we are partnering with our other overseas territories partners to ensure that Bermuda and the other overseas territories and our unique experience and position in the world is understood. In November of last year, we participated at COP26. I myself led a delegation of overseas territories so that the world would know our story. And under the theme of our vision for our healthy oceans, myself, along with 6 other territories, presented our situation to the world at the UK Pavilion on Ocean Day at the COP26 conference. We showed the world how unique our ecosystems and how our biodiversity is so crucial to the state of global oceans. Within the British family, all the overseas territories, along with the UK, control or have responsibility for the 5th largest marine estate. So when you look at it, even a small island like Bermuda is contributing to a major part and is responsible for a huge part of the world's ocean. And we know that ocean health is crucial to global health. And we were happy to have the opportunity to work with the Bermuda Business Development Agency in Glasgow and participate in a luncheon with them at the ICE Hub. And we were proud to stand with them, showing the Bermuda flag and showing how Bermuda is playing its role, not only to be a center for climate risk finance, but also a player, a major player in climate action. Bermuda has, over the last couple years, gone out to the global community and announced our efforts to be a center for climate risk finance, of which we are happy as a government to support, working with the BDA and other entities and with the international insurance community. Bermuda, of course, as everybody knows, is already a center for risk and insurance, one of the major world risk capitals. So it makes eminent sense with that capacity already here, with the ability and innovative ways of creating capital and accessing capital by that, and the talent that exists in Bermuda, that we would be effective in creating the right opportunities globally in the area of climate risk finance. We believe that it is crucial that Bermuda, along with the rest of the world, play its role. not only in our efforts to address climate change, but to create the mechanisms that are going to manage the risks that obviously will emerge around the constant changes in climate and how that affects business, how that affects communities globally. And certainly Bermuda wants to play its role. And we're working with the BDA, our government, we're working with the regulator, the BMA, to ensure that this process happens smoothly, happens effectively, and Bermuda plays its rightful role in this whole effort. As I stated earlier, Bermuda, when it comes to our own efforts at environmental protection, has always tried to push forward, always attempted to be innovative and bold. We have a plan to electrify not only the government fleet of transport, but all transport in Bermuda. We are at this moment investing in water and waste treatment systems that will be more efficient and that will continue to advance Bermuda's own expertise in water conservation to ensure that our community not only is clean and healthy, but also has a safe, secure water supply. We continue to have the best efforts to make sure that this little 22 square miles that we live on, that the land is protected and that we promote proper land conservation and proper land management. And we are proud of what we are doing in that space. We know that to ensure that development in Bermuda is done sensibly and to the benefit of the community, we continue to advance a robust development plan for the island, by balancing that with the interest of community, but also environmental protection. And we are proud to have one of the most robust planning regimes in the region, if not the world, so that we can ensure that in the long term, we preserve open spaces, we have sensible development practices, and that all of this is done to benefit and ensure that our citizens and residents are healthy and prosperous for the future. So we continue to advance Bermuda's image in the world as a place to do good business. We want to position ourselves to be a center for thoughts and ideas around climate action, climate risk finance, and playing, even though we are a small island, we're playing a big role in the effort to manage and mitigate the changes that will come with climate change. I'd like to, as a member of the government, congratulate the BDA and Oxbow for creating the important documentation they have around ESG, and the recent Bermuda report, we believe, tells the Bermuda story in a very eloquent and clear way. It tells the story about the role that our reinsurance and insurance industry, international, in its perspective, wants to seriously ensure that Bermuda is playing its role and bringing the capital, the intellect, and the products that will help the globe to manage all that may happen going forward around climate change. So I congratulate the efforts of all who are participating in this process. We in Bermuda understand the value of partnerships and how partnerships works. And Bermuda's success has been built on partnerships because we could not have done what we've been able to do so far alone. So congratulations to all the participants in this effort. Congratulations to everyone on this webinar. And I look forward to hearing more and working more with all of you around the efforts to advance Bermuda's positioning in the world of climate risk finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Premier Roban. Next, I would like to introduce you to Miqdaad Versi, Head of ESG at Oxbow Partners. Miqdaad has led the development of the report showcasing the ESG maturity of the Bermudian reinsurance industry. Miqdaad, I now hand the webinar over to you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you for all the work that you've done in supporting this report and making it possible. I'd like to share a few slides to talk through the findings of this report and the work that we've been able to have so far. We've called this report The Rising Tide, the maturity of ESG on the island and what it means for the reinsurance or the insurance industry. And the work that we've done here is quite broad. We've been able to work in conjunction with the Bermuda Business Development Agency to assess the ESG maturity of the entire market. We've spoken to over 20 insurers, reinsurers, and ILS funds about their approach to ESG. And what's been so fantastic is the willingness to engage and share the thoughts and the trade-offs, the challenges and the opportunities that ESG provides. We've been able to think and understand how can you approach ESG in a way that can be meaningful. How can you approach ESG not in a way that's a tick box exercise, but one that can make an impact across the world? How can you make the world a better place? There have been lots of discussions that we've had about ESG, about whether is it a minimalist approach where you look at ESG in terms of the very minimum that you need to do to satisfy the regulators, or can it be an opportunity to shape the world in different ways? And people have reacted and are at different points in their journey. And we'll talk about some of that in a second. But we didn't just want to speak to those who are in the market itself. We also wanted to talk to industry leaders. And that's why we also interviewed Craig Swan, the CEO of the BMA, to understand the regulatory perspective. We spoke to the Honourable Walter Roban, who spoke just earlier right now. To understand the political perspective. We spoke to the United Nations Environmental Programme for Sustainable Insurance, Butch Bakani. We also spoke to the stock exchange, to Gregory and Aber and ClimateWise, to understand also the trade perspective, as well as I was speaking to Ekashoi at the IDF. Through all of these different perspectives, we were able to get the context in which we are working. And when you start thinking about how Bermuda plays an important role in ESG going forward, one of the things we want to understand is what is that market in which we're working in, and the perspectives we've gained from these various industry leaders, from the people who are leading the regulation, leading how the stock exchange and investments will work, leading how the thought leadership works across the globe. That really provides that context in which the discussions and the responses and the trade-offs and the challenges that the insurers and reinsurers themselves are facing will come through. So that's been great. And what I'd like to do is just talk you through the narrative of certain things that are coming up, and how I see what that means for the world more broadly. Firstly, what we can see right now is there's been a shift, a real step change. Now insurers can no longer just avoid any action without any consequence. The idea of just having a tick box exercise, the idea of potentially saying things merely for a PR perspective, inaction in that way really is no longer something that is a tenable position going forward. We've seen that because of the activist action. For example, Lloyd's of London targeted by Mary Poppins, not necessarily Bermuda here. We've seen regulators, again, in the States, where the SEC investigated Goldman Sachs, again, not in insurance there, over ESG claims. But what I'm trying to get at here is that even law enforcement has happened. The police in Europe raided Deutsche Bank over greenwashing allegations. And there have even been legal action. For example, Shell directors were sued for failing to prepare the company for net zero. These are not all things that are impacting insurers or reinsurers in Bermuda yet, but we're seeing this across the globe. And it's quite clear that many of these challenges, many of the issues that people are facing are going to be issues that are going to impact insurers and reinsurers here on the island as well. And therefore, what we're going to see and what we already start seeing from our discussions with the insurers and reinsurers we've spoken to is that no longer are they thinking in a simplistic way. And even those who are early on in their journey, having taken no real action on ESG, recognize that they will have to change. And for example, in the Bermudian context, in terms of the report results, we see that 86% of participants cited investors and shareholders as the biggest driver of ESG. And that's followed by 81% who said employees, 38% who said internal management, and 28% who said regulators. And so what we also see here is there's not just that sort of stick approach, because activists, regulators, law enforcement agencies, and legal action are saying that you have to act. There's also a push. There's also the fact that investors and shareholders, the owners of the company, want things to change. Also, the employees, the people who are working at the company, want things to change. And also internal management, in some cases, really wants to change. And it seems actually in Bermuda, rather than it being a stick, it's actually a push. It seems to be a real ambition and a really willingness to change and act when it comes to ESG. And that's really great to see. And so when we try to assess the reality of how all of these various actors, all the participants in the discussions that we had, all 20 plus our insurers, reinsurers, and ILS funds have acted when it comes to ESG, we've seen, and we've created a framework. We asked a number of different questions. We got to the nuance of the types of things that people were doing. We didn't just do a tick box exercise in terms of our analysis and our survey. We really understood what type of action was happening. And because of that sort of more nuanced approach, we were able to really see who we thought were industry leaders and those who are perhaps not so far ahead, even if they may look quite far ahead if you just had a tick box survey. And so from our perspective, we saw that about 14% of participants hadn't really taken any action whatsoever. The vast majority were in what we called the early stage of maturity, and a small proportion were well developed and actually were pushing forward and demonstrating real leadership when it came to ESG. And I think that's really interesting to see that as a whole, the island and actually across the globe, many insurers and reinsurers are thinking about how to best engage when it comes to ESG. And the report that we put together lays out across all the different areas, across underwriting, across investments, across data, across advocacy and thought leadership, how you can try and think about ESG effectively. And it's really good to see that many people who we've spoken to a few months ago have already started taking even greater action following our initial discussion. So I'd say overall, Bermuda is well placed to tackle these challenges, but actually as a whole, most are early on in their journey. But what we also notice is that there might be some reinsurers who are really, really challenged and are finding it difficult to identify what to happen, what to do. But others are really considering how to best react. And some have real developed approaches. For example, when it comes to building resilience, almost all the participants we spoke to believed that Bermuda's expertise in this area, when it comes to, for example, natural catastrophe risk, are really well placed to drive the industry forward. And with the Insurance Development Forum doing brilliant work across the globe, a third of the participants that we are in, that we spoke to, a third of them are part of the Insurance Development Forum because they really see the value in trying to build resilience or act in more effective ways. Similarly, as a whole, ESG when it comes to investment, Bermudian reinsurers are quite well placed, and you'd say about almost half of participants have integrated ESG in some way into their investment process. That's not to say they've cracked the nail entirely. Some are more developed and have dashboards and are able to understand exactly what happens when it comes to investment, when it comes to their investment in relation to ESG. They're able to see who are the outliers, who are the people who are contributing the greatest amount, and others have thought about ESG in their investment in some way because they've outsourced their investment to PRI, so that's the Principles for Responsible Investment, accredited, outsourced asset managers. And so that's great to see. But the range and the scope of what can be done is really interesting. But as a whole, whilst there have been really great action when it comes to things like certain elements of building resilience and working collaboratively, when it comes to investment, for example, when it comes to ESG, on things like net zero underwriting, when it comes to innovative ESG propositions, most are struggling. And that's because the world is often struggling in this space. All right, now, not many have across the globe, no one's really cracked the idea of how do you underwrite in the net zero way? How do you incorporate ESG effectively into your underwriting process? A lot of people might be thinking about it, but very few have cracked it yet. And similarly, when it comes to innovative ESG propositions, a lot of people are considering on working on propositions to help advance the ESG agendas, but very few have been able to crack this and really find new ways of innovative approaches. A lot of working, for example, in renewables, a lot of working in similar spaces where they can make a difference. However, when you start thinking about ESG more holistically, there are questions, for example, about whether you can use S, for example, supporting places in the developing world in different ways, and actually really making a difference and making the world a better place. People are thinking about new innovative sources of capital, which can be more sustainability linked to help unlock greater funding and greater opportunities when it comes to actually underwriting those who perhaps can't afford the same premiums as others in the developed world. There's lots that can be done and lots of people are looking into, but so far this is an area that the greater work can be done. But one thing I'd say is that there are barriers that are preventing people moving and being as ambitious as they'd like to be, whether that's resource. Most people cited internal resource as a major barrier to accelerating ESG. And only just over a third of participants, and they're mainly at bigger companies, had even a dedicated resource associated with ESG, with almost all having less than 2 FTEs. So when you have a lack of resource, that's clearly a barrier. Similarly, the challenges when it comes to ESG data, many of the people we spoke to cited reliable ESG data as a real issue. And we know that's a challenge. We know the fact that many of the market sources when it comes to ESG data are superficial, or they're not necessarily correlated to one another even, and you have challenges when it comes to coverage. When you put all of these things together, it makes it quite hard to act when the data is not perfect. And also, methodology is not always there. How to embed ESG into underwriting. We've talked about that just previously, but the methodology isn't necessarily there. And so when you think about these barriers, they do exist. They make it quite difficult. But what's really important, and what we've already seen, is that's not an excuse for inaction. And many of the insurers and Bermudian reinsurers who we've spoken to recognize that. They see that that's not an excuse. And while some people are struggling as to how to deal with this, there are ways forward. And those who are really early on in their journey, the first thing that they actually, many of the people have started doing is just documenting what they're currently doing. And a lot of the people we've spoken to, when they start documenting their current activity, they realize actually they're doing far more than they previously thought. And that is a bottom-up analysis of what's going on. The next thing to do is really create that vision. What's that ambition that they want to achieve? And some of the people who we've spoken to hadn't yet done that. But when they start putting that vision and ambition in place, and they know what they're currently doing, they then have to build the strategy, the action plan to get from where they are to where they want to get to embed ESG across their business, and then be able to tell that story. And when people start being able to tell their story in a way that's not greenwashing, not PR exercise, but actually reflects who they are as insurers, how they are as reinsurers, how they want to change the world, what their passion is in order to make a difference, that's where things really become exciting. That's where a lot of people can make a real difference. And they want to find out how data can fit into that to ensure it's a data-driven exercise, and they can't do it alone. They need to work with others. And the key point here is when they're starting to develop your own strategy as to what you want to do, you don't have to do everything. And what we've seen is that people take different angles. They take a different perspective on where they want to lead. They may want to cover a lot of these different areas, but some want to insure more of the world's risks. Some people want to influence others and take a more advocacy approach. Others want to internally look, at how can they improve their internal ESG credentials. Others want to collaborate internationally. Others want to think about how can they be more transparent? How can they hold themselves accountable? What matters is not necessarily doing everything. What matters is they start moving in that journey, recognizing whatever the barriers that they've already identified, we've seen that they've identified, they find a way to make sure that they can demonstrate their ESG credentials, they can tell their story, and they can make a difference for the better. So hopefully, I'd like you to, if you do have the opportunity, read the report. You can find it on our website. Get in touch with us if you'd like to find out more. And really, I really hope that this short summary of the key things that we thought and some of the insights that have come from it are going to be really, really valuable. Thank you so much for listening. And we're now going to go to the next part of the session today. We're going to talk to the panel and hear their perspectives on these really important issues. And now we'd like to move on to our panel discussion today on Bermuda as a center of excellence for ESG. We're very fortunate to have a brilliant panel here with three illustrious guests. Firstly, Harriet James, ESG strategy at RenRe. She's responsible for managing and progressing RenRe's ESG strategy across the company, including identifying and managing ESG priorities and driving the development of new sustainability initiatives. Thank you, Harriet, for joining us today. Next, we have Andy McFarlane, who's Head of Climate at AXA XL. Andy's responsible for the global climate strategy for AXA XL. This entails ensuring all their climate-related efforts across all the areas of the business, insurance and reinsurance, are aligned towards furthering AXA XL's sustainability ambitions and AXA's climate leadership. And Shannon Sun, who's our third panelist. She's Head of Corporate Development and Chair of the Innovation Committee at AIG Re, which has platforms including Validus Re, AlphaCat Talbot Treaty, and Validus Research. She's responsible for AIG Re's corporate development related initiatives, innovation strategy, and Validus Re's retrocession needs for non-property lines of business. Thank you all for joining us today and participating in this panel. I'd like to get really straight into the depth of this discussion and the difficult topics that we'd like to cover related to ESG. In the report findings that we talked about just now, we saw how more and more people are seeing ESG no longer as just a tick box exercise, but one where there can be really meaningful action and impact. And given that Bermuda aims to be the climate risk capital of the world, and that includes ambitions specifically in ESG leadership, one of the questions we need to, I'd like to delve into today is understanding how we can ensure that ESG activities really do have a meaningful impact. Harriet, do you want to have a first pass at this?
Sure, thanks, Miqdaad. So firstly, we as a reinsurance industry are incredibly well positioned to bring to bear our climate risk modeling expertise and do what we do best, which is efficient transfer of risk from those who cannot bear it to those who can. And given that background, Bermuda's current positioning, as has been mentioned a few times, as the climate risk capital of the world, we think provides a solid foundation from which ESG leadership is a natural progression, as well as a great opportunity. And at Renaissance Re, we're very much focused on ESG as an opportunity. We approach it with the same principles we apply to all areas of the company, with strategic intent, with thoughtfulness, and in a very deliberate manner. And back in 2019, when I built out our ESG strategy in partnership with senior management, we spent a lot of time considering what it means to us and how we can kind of use our risk acumen to make a meaningful impact. And so we define ESG as the framework used to outline what we're deliberately and proactively doing in this space, really kind of honing in on material areas where we as a company can leverage our own expertise for good. So we're kind of purposefully shifting away from what it kind of potentially originated as a defensive risk assessment or a box ticking exercise, to instead focus on the opportunities that ESG presents and how it really resonates with our company's specific kind of purpose and expertise. So, for example, leveraging our investments and underwriting portfolios to promote a low carbon future both furthers our corporate purpose, which is to protect communities and enable prosperity, whilst also helping reduce long-term climate risk to our business. And the final point I'd like to make, which was articulated by our CEO, Kevin O'Donnell, in our most recent letter to shareholders, is that climate change is both an existential threat to the planet and an imminent risk to our industry. And we bear the responsibility of being part of the solution. And so in our view at Renaissance Re, focusing on ESG in a meaningful way is not only the right thing to do, but it's also an imperative part of our vision to be the best underwriter and by extension to be a truly sustainable and resilient reinsurer.
Thanks, Harriet. Andy, would you like to add anything?
No, I think just building on what Harriet mentioned there around the opportunities that we've got. I think as an insurer, an investor, and as a company, the opportunities that we have through the investments we make, the risks that we take on, and the actions that we take as a company, we've sort of brought that to light in our Action for Progress Index, which really highlights the sort of goals that we've set within each of those areas. And really brings to the forefront the opportunities that we have in this space. I think the other angle as well is that transition to a low carbon economy. So, we within Bermuda, we're obviously very well versed, as Harriet pointed out, in terms of the extent to which we have the expertise around risk modeling related to climate, the business that we write and that we focus on out in Bermuda. But we really have that opportunity as the economy transitions to that low carbon world. There are going to be significant changes in the economic activity of the clients we support as an insurer as well as a reinsurer. And so it's how we're able to react, how we're able to bring to bear that value that insurance brings to the global economy into those transitioning parts of the economy. They will change at different times in different geographies. And so it's making sure that that value that insurance has in enabling that economic activity, we're able to bring to bear as the economy transitions. I think the other angle to explore and think about is the extent to which transitions can be thought about within an orderly and a disorderly fashion. And so that goal that we all have and that we're all working towards to be net zero by 2050, there are going to be a number of bumps in the road as we get there. So, what might those bumps look like? How might it impact our clients, and what opportunities do we have to help our clients navigate through this changing economy?
Thanks, Andy. Shannon, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I think I echo what Harriet and Andy have said. I think greenwashing is real, and you're always going to get some bad actors in the industry. But I think what's important for us is, as an industry, I think as demonstrated by this panel, we have to first recognize the importance of ESG. While it's easy to blame the lack of data, the lack of industry standard for non-action, and that the energy transition could be a long, hard road, but that road is just getting shorter and shorter, and the need for solution is becoming more urgent for us. At AIG Re, we do recognize that without tackling the temperature rises, the associated increase in catastrophe risks, the world we live in is going to become less livable and less insurable. So that's a real impact for us as insurers and reinsurers. I think secondly, to have a real meaningful impact, we have to hold each other accountable and be specific about what about your approach. What is the framework? Be transparent. How is it incorporated into the number one, our operational footprint, and number two, the products and the services that we provide to our clients. You know, it's easy to see, and how do we do that? I think we hold each other accountable by enforcing disclosures. What is the framework and data that you've captured? Each one of us has to recognize that with disclosure comes accountability. So I think that would drive some of the real changes that we will see.
And you talked about people holding one another to account. I think that's a really interesting point. Can I just ask a little bit about that? There are a lot of activists who've tried to hold others to account through these league tables, for example. There are regulators in different parts of the world who started going quite hard on certain disclosures and other items. And actually, in some places, not necessarily in the insurance industry, but police have even got involved when they've tried to find, hold people to account. To what extent do you think there's a risk of that going too far, and to what extent do you think actually, at the moment we need to be held to account far more than we currently are?
I think activists is one of the stakeholders to us, right? As an insurer and a reinsurer, I think what we do is more than we have to think broader than our shareholders and the share price. We have our employees to hold us accountable. We have the regulators. The activists are part of that. Our stakeholders, our clients are all part of this ecosystem. I think we have to listen to all of the different groups and take some actions. And actually, I think what's important is to demonstrate and actually show with data, with support of what we have done and the progress that we're making and the road that we're going to embark on. I think that would satisfy, that communication and that transparency is going to help the industry as a whole and help ourselves as a whole to hold ourselves accountable.
All of you three are quite large players in the market. Do you think some of the items and the discussions that we've had so far about meaningful impact are the same for some of the much smaller players in this market? Or what else needs to be done to help maybe support those who are perhaps smaller to have a meaningful impact as well? Anyone want to jump in? No?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think it doesn't matter whether you're small or large. I think innovation quite often comes from small companies, comes from startups. I think when you're small, you're nimble. I don't think size matters. I think the importance of first recognize that it is important. You want to put your efforts and resources into this issue and start to innovate, start thinking about the different ways of doing things, capturing data, analyze it, create new products. I think that's what's important. We all have limited resources and it is a matter of prioritizing it.
Great. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, it'd be great we can perhaps move to the next area that I'd like to explore, which actually is very linked to that. In a lot of the discussions that we've had with Bermudian reinsurers and insurers throughout the process in building this report that we've talked about today, there have been a number of barriers that have been talked about, where people have a very high ambition, but are struggling to perhaps reach it as quickly as they'd like to. And the things that they've talked about are, for example, a lack of resource, ESG data not necessarily being there in the way that they wanted, specific challenges, for example, to do with underwriting and how to deal with ESG within underwriting or net zero underwriting. So what do you think is actually holding and preventing reinsurers from doing more than they currently are doing? Is it really resource and for example, data? I mean, obviously, we've heard about the challenges, for example, when it comes to S&P and the fact that Tesla was moved down and ExxonMobil was considered to be part of the sustainability index, and people had challenges and questions about it and aren't really comfortable with certain elements of data. What's your view on these types of things? are these real barriers, or are there ways that we can circumvent them and actually move forward? Shannon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can carry on with what the point I was making is, I think the simple answer here is a lack of incentives. You know, as I said, we all have limited resources. So whether that's a lack of incentive from the regulatory requirements that you have to do some of the disclosures, or whether that's from our stakeholders, the regulators, the peers, the stakeholder, our clients and the employees. I think that holding each other accountable is really key to force change. I think we all have a role to play here. It's not just the executives and the board. Now, it has to. I think it's very important for the board and executive management team to recognize that. Number one, you have to prioritize it, put it on the agenda. Number two, then start building a business case. What's the roadmap to net zero, for example, or your ESG strategy? The metrics and the data, yes, it's real. There is a lack of data. There is a lack of industry standard, both internally and externally. It's not, the change is not going to come overnight. But we have to start somewhere. It's about progress, and it's not about perfection from day one. And yeah, I think at the same, yeah, sorry, Andy.
No, I was just going to sort of echo that. I think that's a great point, Shannon. It's not about perfection from day one, right? It's we know that there are limitations in data, limitations in the availability of data, the coverage of data. But you know, I think our industry also has a history of doing the best that we can with the data that we have available to us. So I think what we can continue to push for is improvement in that data, and I think that's one area that we're really looking at in terms of how do we make decisions? How do we make decisions in relation to our views around our clients and the portfolios that we write? What's the best place to get that data? Who do we need to work with and partner with in order to get that data? Is it available from an external vendor? Should our clients be providing us with that data? Is that the direction of travel that everybody's going? You know, we're focusing on climate in this sort of discussion as the speed with which climate and regulation changes. But obviously ESG is not just climate. There are other aspects to it. So how will we see those other requirements begin to accelerate and the data associated with that evolve? You know, should it become part of underwriting information as we currently get? Should our clients be providing us with emissions information, information on their targets and their plans as part of the underwriting submissions, so that we can do what we currently do with the data we get as part of our underwriting and make decisions through our own companies and our own processes. So yeah, I mean, there are definite limitations associated with the data. I mean, I think the other angle is some of the scoring mechanisms have been developed with different intentions and perspectives in mind. So we need to be very careful in the same way that we're very careful when we translate the science to impacts on our physical risk. We need to be very careful in the way that we translate scoring mechanisms around ESG to the appropriateness and relative impact for our business. So yeah, limitations, but I think we're on the right path.
And you know, there are companies for whom this is a bigger challenge. We've seen, for example, how some people have said because of the lack of ESG data, we can't really make any progress whatsoever. For most of, I think, on this panel, most of you have already started and continue to make progress despite the lack of data. Do any of you want to talk a bit about how you try to navigate that space? Harriet, yeah.
I am happy to take that one. So from our perspective, I mean, certainly to echo the comments already made, in the last few years, there's been a stark increase in stakeholder focus on providing greater transparency around ESG related metrics and efforts to really demonstrate progression, whether that's regulators, investors, or the talent we want to attract into our industry. And as a data-driven company who are focused on precision, that lack of standardization and the shifting landscape in the ESG metric space has made it difficult to really effectively demonstrate or compare levels of progression using data, as the other panelists have mentioned. So at Renaissance Re, we proactively engage with our stakeholders so that they are clear about where we're focused and what we've done. And we've really been kind of proactively enhancing our disclosures so that our public narrative really communicates externally what's always been an implicit part of our culture internally. But I think when we think about the point of kind of, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, in our view, an equally important saying is you can hit the target but miss the point. And I think whilst ESG metrics provide a useful data point, focusing on targets or metrics alone has the potential to kind of undermine or even dilute genuine ESG ambitions down to something that isn't actually representative of progress. So whilst at Renaissance Re, we are proactively developing our internal ESG metrics and are supporting our stakeholders in their journey to do the same, we're also very cognizant of the fact that meaningful progress in the sustainability space will come as a result of long-term holistic strategy. And some of the most important changes that we want to see are going to be culture shifts that we simply can't boil down into a simple metric. So I think it's very much a matter of the metrics and the data and the targets complementing that true kind of embedment of ESG across the industry.
Andy, it sounded like you wanted to come in. No?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Harriet just said. I think as a reinsurer, from a reinsurer's perspective, is you can argue that we don't have the same access to the underlying detailed client data as an insurance company could. But I think the other side of the argument is, at the same time, as a treaty underwriter, we have access to a larger quantity of data. We see a much larger proportion of the market share or market data than a local insurer might be seeing. So this gives us an advantage. I think we have to be smart on how we use it. We have to work with our cedents, work with the brokers, and introduce a design of the right data set to be captured at source. I think the across industry collaboration is key here as well.
Great, thank you very much. I guess linked to that then, when we're trying to navigate these difficult spaces, when there's a lack of data, when there are difficult challenges, and it's a relatively new topic as ESG, there's always a question of innovation. And given Bermuda's leadership role in innovation in many respects, do you think we're going to see a lot of innovation in this space? New products, acting or engaging in new sectors, doing new things? How are these going to manifest themselves in any way? And do you think it's really going to make a real impact on the back of all of this innovation? Are we going to see a lot more of that? Andy, do you want to have a first pass?
Sure, thanks, Miqdaad. So, as I mentioned earlier, that transition to the low carbon economy is going to create a lot of disruption globally across all parts of the economy. So for sure, there is going to be new technologies, the need to be more efficient in our energy production, the need to be more efficient in the way we create that economic activity. And those decisions that consumers make is going to all drive the clients that we support, the changes in their business models. So for sure, how do we support that innovation in the underlying sort of areas of the economy, how those risks evolve. That's an opportunity for us, definitely. But then I do think there'll be other areas that will emerge, not necessarily related to specific products, but perhaps markets. So carbon markets is one example of that, where there is a sort of a growing demand around carbon offsets. Related to that, there's the growing awareness around nature and the value of nature and biodiversity in the global economy. Historically, nature hasn't been included in a GDP metric or an economic output, and to some degree, that's potentially a reason for where we find ourselves today. So that awareness and that sort of focus that these parts of the economy are getting will create markets for us. So within the carbon world, it could be increasing whether it's natural assets like forests or mangroves, the extent to which those need to be insured, the extent to which we can create efficiency in those carbon offsets through perhaps carbon offset insurance. So a lot of opportunities to contemplate and think through as the carbon market evolves. And then natural assets, right? So internally at AXA XL, through work we've done around ocean risk, we've been looking at the value that mangrove forests bring from a resilience as well as a carbon sequestration perspective. So mangrove forests have been extensive destruction of those globally, again highlighting the value that they bring from a resilience perspective. So reducing the impacts of waves through storms. They even react to rising sea levels. So the extent to which those type of natural assets need to be part of the resilience and adaptation piece, those will begin to have a value. Same with coral reefs and other natural assets. So what sort of market will evolve and exist for those, and how do we have a role to play as an insurer and reinsurer in terms of facilitating and promoting this type of activity? So yeah, I definitely think there will be significant innovation. I think regulatory environments, how they react to those new type of products, the ability to write products moving away from perhaps indemnity and thinking about parametric as another tool in our toolkit, how regulatory environments react to making that process more efficient and more allowing better access to those type of products. So I think innovation will exist. And I think regulatory environments reacting to that innovation are going to be as important to allow those products and markets to evolve.
Thanks, Andy. And just continuing on that, in that vein, we talked about different sectors before. Potentially in part of the developing world. When you think about ESG and sustainability and trying to make the world a better place over and above the sort of financial requirements or the main minimum requirements when it comes to risk, actually trying to make the world a better place and looking at the S in that vein. Do you see there to be potential in expanding the amount of insurance and reinsurance in parts of the developing world, in agriculture, in protecting drought in Somalia, for example? Like, do you think those are potentially areas that can be developed further, especially given the fact that there might be different sources of capital that might be able to, might be lower cost, which might be able to give us the opportunity to reach those areas in a similar way?
For sure. So I'll just jump in there quickly, and then if Harriet and Shannon want to contribute. So for sure, I mean, I think that's what you're alluding to there, is that growing protection gap between economic and insured losses, and the extent to which that is growing, not only in the developed economies but equally in emerging markets. So a lot of work being done through entities like the IDF in terms of bringing about the ability to sort of model and get a view on what the risk those communities might present what hazards they're exposed to, the extent to which that might be changing over time, to really create those markets and opportunities to understand those risks so we can bring that capital to bear. I think it also relates to demonstrating that value of insurance that I mentioned earlier, right? So, we work in the industry, we know the value that insurance brings from a disaster recovery and a post-event reconstruction. We did some work with the Cambridge Centre for Risk Studies a couple of years ago, investigating what exactly that value is. And we found that as insurance penetration increases as a percentage of GDP, that the speed to recovery reduces by roughly 12 months for every 1% increase we see. So, I think it's about making that type of information available, figuring out how we can bring those solutions to those communities. Whether it's through structures like microinsurance or whether it's through structures like, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, CRIF, where, money is provided at a more macro level, and that money then makes its way through to the communities affected through the sort of government intervention. How do we demonstrate and talk about those success stories and bring those to those developing economy, those countries which in all likelihood are going to be more affected by a changing climate than the developed world. So it's equally our opportunity and perhaps our responsibility to bring that knowledge and awareness around that value that insurance brings to help close that protection gap.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone want to jump in? Hi, Shannon.
Just a quick comment from me. Is I think the fact that the role of reinsurers is relatively undefined by some is one of the biggest opportunities our industry have just to be able to articulate our social value proposition. So to your question, Miqdaad, and the role that we can play in stewarding positive ESG behaviors and continuing to do more in a meaningful way. And at RenRe, we were founded in Bermuda in 1993, and our company was built upon a foundation of innovation focused on bringing new expertise to understanding risks. So fast forward almost 30 years, we believe the next phase of innovation for the Bermuda market is in this sustainability space. And as such, this year, we actually promoted one of our most senior underwriters, Kahul Kar, into a role that will be focused on leading the development of new products and tools to respond to emerging underwriting opportunities that are born out of these key ESG topics. And that builds upon, as Andy mentioned, the IDF, where we co-chair the risk modeling steering group, and also our kind of continued focus on this through our dedicated public sector partnerships team as well. So I think there's great opportunity there, and we really value and recognize innovation in this space. And we're really excited about what's ahead for us as a company and for the industry more broadly as well.
Yeah, I think Harriet and Andy have talked more around the products and the services we can provide. I want to bring it to the other side of the coin, is where the capital, the money is. We have seen in recent years there's a flood of investment money that coming into the ESG space. Just in 2021, we've seen 53% increase in ESG earmarked investment funds from asset management industry. Portion of that is already flowing to the ILS space. We have seen some spilling over there. We have seen a lot of the innovation in Bermuda and outside of Bermuda around ESG friendly investment opportunities, and that would fuel some of the product developments, and that would give us some incentives around the micro insurance, closing the protection gap. I think it will all come together.
Thank you very much, and it was great having the opportunity to speak to all of you about these topics. I know we could continue talking about these for a long time, and across the report, we've had the opportunity to speak to many of you, to all of you, for quite a long time about these very topics. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much for participating today in the panel. And obviously, there are more details in the report that we've laid out. And if you'd like to speak to any of us again, I'm sure all of us would be very interested in speaking to many more of you about these types of topics. It's an area that I think we're all really interested in. Hopefully we can make the world a better place, and we can really make a difference in a way that we haven't been able to so far. So I hope that everyone who's watching has enjoyed it, and look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you to the panel, and thank you very much for watching.